Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Give me just 1 minute. I'll be right there. Just gonna set up, inshallah. Some connection issues, but they're solved. Just give me 1 minute. Okay. Alhamdulillah, wa salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'een. Okay, so I'm going to get started with the questions you guys wrote in. Thank you for writing them. Actually, I thought that some of the questions you guys put in this time were really, really interesting. And I apologize for the lateness. Inshallah, it won't happen again. Um, Please do in-depth study of Surat Yusuf. I really want to know how it's Ahsan al-Qasas. Me too. I am going to probably do a study of Surat Yusuf. Well, this Ramadan is dedicated to Ali Imran, and I really do want to do Yusuf. It'll probably be early next year, inshallah. Just given the calendar I have laid out for surahs, probably early next year I'll get around to Surat Yusuf, inshallah. How can you find an anchor in a surah? Well, all of the study of coherence is basically a study of careful reading, right? If you're carefully reading a surah and you're noticing words recur or themes recur, you take note of them, and that's really how anchors are discovered, like the anchor I mentioned of trade in Al-Baqarah, or clarity in Surah Al-Dukhan, or um, even the word Quran is an anchor, for example, in Surah Al-Isra. So you have different kinds of anchors, and the easiest ones are obviously the same word or a derivative of the same word used again. But other times it may be a similar theme. So it's just a careful reading that helps you get exposed to which anchors there are in a surah. كما نرى افتتحت السورة بالاستفهام عما يتساءلون. هل الآية الثانية عن النبأ العظيم هي بالضرورة جواب لهذا الاستفهام؟ إن لم يكن فأين جواب الاستفهام؟ فالحديث بعد الآية الثانية تغير وانفصل عن بداية السورة لينتقل إلى الحديث عن عظمة الخالق في الكون والأنعم كالجبال والأرض والليل والشمس، فلا نجد جوابا للاستفهام. وما هي الغاية من الاستفهام في القرآن؟ إذن أن العديد من السورة تبدأ بالاستفهام. The question in Arabic is actually about the Surah Naba, عما يتساءلون, what are they asking about? And the question, well, الجواب بالإنجليزية ليستفيد الجميع للأسف. I just told whoever, right? So questions are sometimes, or for example, if my daughter is speaking to me disrespectfully and I say, are you going to talk like that? That's not a question. That means don't talk like that. Or how dare you speak like this? عَمَّا يَتَسَاءَلُونَ, what are they asking about, is not really a question. It's a rhetorical question. World of a difference. And that means, it's not just saying, what are they asking about? The great day? It actually means, how dare they ask about the day of judgment? How dare they ask? Are they seriously asking about this? So this is actually a way of expressing anger, frustration. This is a way of Allah Azza wa Jal expressing His displeasure with those who are so obnoxious that they question the reality of Judgment Day. So that's a little bit about why questions are used in the Quran. Please discuss the anchors in Surah Al-Baqarah, especially in the Bani Israel portion. You'd have to go through the durus on Baqarah to identify the anchors there. I think one of the big anchors there is buying and selling once again. The ayat of Allah, or the book of Allah, is a major anchor there. And there may not be an anchor within a particular section. It may be in the larger surah. I'd have to look at that section particularly once again to see if there are some specific anchors to that section. In lesson 10, let me go back up. In lesson 10, you showed us the linear coherence and symmetry of the ayat and the Israelites in Baqarah from ayah 40 to 122. But why is ayah 123, which is very, very similar to ayah 48, not included? Actually, in my detailed discussion, I may not have included it in that PowerPoint, but it should be included.
It should be. I understand that 124 is not part of that discussion. Yeah, no, I agree with you. 123, Ya Bani Israel should be included. Yeah. And even the ones after that, وَاتَّقُوا يَوْمًا وَاتَّقُوا يَوْمًا, that's deliberately a repeat. So it's as though the way this entire discourse opens is the way that it closes. So they are certainly related to one another. Um, it was that it was said that Meccan surahs normally have three messages: Tawheed, believing in the prophets, Allah, Judgment Day. Um, no, I'd say more like six subjects, not three subjects. So the argument, the case for Allah's creation and Allah's right to be worshipped, what you're calling here Tawheed. Tawheed means the oneness of Allah, but the oneness of Allah is only a very small subject in the Quran. Really, it's actually the power of Allah, the right of Allah to be worshipped alone, the mercy of Allah, the justice of Allah. All of those things they're much bigger than just Tawheed. So instead of using the term Tawheed, um, I prefer saying Iman in Allah. And then, of course, Iman in the Akhirah, which you can call eschatology also, like Judgment Day, heaven and hell, and all of those things, right? That's Akhirah, which you put here as number three in your question. And believing in prophets and the ayat of Allah. Revelation, meaning the case for revelation, that's a third argument. But there are additional things. Of course, lessons from history is a big part. Uh, and lessons from previous nations and their failures. Allah will also mention counsel to His Prophet. ﷺ. There are passages dedicated to don't worry about what they say, remain committed, remain steadfast, let don't become weakened or saddened by what they say, don't fear them, etc. So there's that kind of a discourse, and there's exhortation sometimes to or hope for those who are being persecuted, that no matter what they say to you, even those who have believed, well, this happened to people before you also, and you need to be prepared. So there are a number of, and of course, one more is not just about the destruction of or the consequences of Judgment Day, but also the destruction of nation that is coming. Meaning Quraysh are behaving like the people of Fir'aun or Ad or Thamud, so they should be aware that there's a punishment that's coming very close, meaning a worldly punishment that might come to them. So there's more than one subject. Angelika Norway, I think, is correct in pointing out there's about six that dominate the Meccan Quran subject discourse, and they interplay with each other. If you want details on this, in Surat Qaf, my detailed study of Surat Qaf on Bayyinah TV, I actually describe the major subjects of Meccan Quran and how in any Meccan surah you'll find a distribution of those subjects in different arrangement, how each arrangement presents a different kind of logic and different set of arguments for the overall thesis of a surah. So that would be an interesting place for you to look at, inshallah. I thought I put a lot of work in Qaf, and I believe I did that in Mulk also. But Qaf in particular, if I remember correctly, you should take a look. If you may please tell us where we can find a detailed argument about naskh in the Quran. I surfed the net for Dr. Atnak, but this I couldn't find it. If you please give me more explanation or reference. Okay, naskh. You can look at Shah Waliullah Dahelwi rahimahullah's argument about the 6 ayat that he considers mansukh, and how he looked at the classical opinions of the 40 some ayat that others, and some had added the number to 200 ayat that are abrogated in the Quran, and he disproved that and then brought it down to 6. And then Amin Ahsan Islahi is an Urdu compilation, but I believe in the first volume's been translated into English, called Pondering Over the Quran. The Urdu compilation is called Tadabbur al-Quran. He discusses why he doesn't hold the view of Naskh, so he talks about that there. In the English language, of the scholars that, of course, support the view that there is abrogation in the Quran, Dr. Yasir Qadi's book on sciences of the Quran has a Naskh section that you might benefit from. On the classical view of Naskh, an Arabic book, Mabahith fi Ulum al-Quran by Manna al-Qattan, and also Alusi's al-Itqan fi Ulum al-Quran would be good sources for the Naskh subject. Um, can you share with us your favorite Quran gem? Which surah is the most complex or amazing structure from the ones you've studied so far? I mean, they're all incredible, and my favorite gem is the one I'm studying at the moment. So if you asked me yesterday, it would be different. If you asked me today, it's different. So um, I'll tell you what I'm studying now. I could tell you a little bit about that. in the middle of my study of Surah Al Imran. Let me grab the Mus'haf. And those of you that really want to benefit from this, go grab a copy of Quran or translation so I can show you what I'm talking about. Okay? Okay. All right. So we're looking at Surah Al Imran in the very beginning. Okay? Third surah, beginning. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alif Lam Mim. Allahu la ilaha illa huwa al-hayyul qayyum. The first or the second ayah of the surah is about Allah. It's very, if you're looking at the translation, I won't go into translation, you can see it yourselves, inshallah. The second ayah, Allah, no one is to be worshipped. He's the Hayy Qayyum, the living, the one who establishes and maintains all things. So let's summarize this. The first subject of the surah is Allah Himself, something about Allah. Let's keep it simple. نزل عليك الكتاب بالحق مصدقا لما بين يديه وأنزل التوراة والإنجيل من قبل هدى للناس وأنزل الفرقان. The second subject is revelation, that Allah Azza wa Jal sent revelation. And I'd add a third subject. The third subject is هدى للناس وأنزل الفرقان, meaning who is this revelation for? It's for the benefit of people, for the guidance of people. So I'll repeat. The first subject was Allah Himself. Who is Allah? And some things about Allah. The second subject is Allah sends revelation. The third item mentioned is that He sends that revelation for the benefit of people, okay, or the guidance of people. And then the fourth subject is إن الله لا يخفى عليه شيء. No, إن الذين كفروا بآيات الله لهم عذاب شديد والله عزيز ذو انتقام. That those who disbelieve have a terrible punishment coming for them. So disbelievers. Four subjects. I'll repeat them again. Allah, number one. Revelation, number two. Who the revelation is for and what it's for. It's guidance for people. And number four is disbelievers. Okay? Now watch. إن الله لا يخفى عليه شيء في الأرض ولا في السماء هو الذي يصوركم في الأرحام كيف يشاء لا إله إلا هو العزيز. Let me get my napkin. Very bad allergies today. Okay, Bismillah. So in ayah number 5, nothing is hidden from Allah. He's the one who made you in the wombs of your mother. In the next ayah, and no one is to be worshipped except Him. Meaning you're learning something about Allah again. As a matter of fact, the same phrase La ilaha illa huwa repeats itself from the first subject. Meaning we're back to talking about Allah. But this time, Allah is explaining what He mentioned the first time. He's elaborating on it this time. How is He elaborating? He's saying He's Al-Hayy. And how is He Al-Hayy? Well, He's the living, and that's why He's the source of all life. Even you, when you were in the wombs of your mother, that you're supposed to be dead, and He brought you to life in that womb of the mother. Right? So He's Al-Hayy. And Al-Qayyum, He maintains you in the womb of your mother. And you're a secret inside. Your mother doesn't even know she's carrying you. He knows it. لا يخفى عليه شيء في الأرض ولا في السماء. Nothing is hidden from Him, not in the earth, not in the sky. And even part of you is in the earth, inside your mother, and part of you is in the sky, the ruh, that is brought down by the angel. So He's actually elaborating Al-Hayyul Qayyum with an example of you pondering over yourself when He talks about Himself the second time. 4 subjects. The first one was Allah, the second was revelation, then guidance. The revelation is guidance for people and disbelievers. The first subject is now being explained by Allah in the 5th ayah. And then after you internalize that, then think about La ilaha illa huwa again. Like that same subject in the beginning, Allahu la ilaha illa huwa, think about it again. And then you'll realize something new about Allah. And what is that? Al-Aziz al-Hakim. That Allah is the ultimate authority. He's all wise. There's lots more to say about that, but I'll keep going. هو الذي أنزل عليك الكتاب منه آيات محكمات هن أم الكتاب وأخر متشابهات. He's the one who sent the book. In it there are ayat that are closely knit, others that are ambiguous and similar. He's talking about revelation. If you recall, the second subject was revelation. Now, when we did 1, 2, 3, 4, we're back to 1, 2, 3, 4. Item number 2 once again is revelation. Now he's explaining some things about revelation that you need to understand. There are 2 kinds of ayat in revelation. Then he says those who have deviation in their hearts, فيتبعون ما تشابه منه ابتغاء الفتنة وابتغاء تأويله وما يعلم تأويله إلا الله والراسخون في العلم يقولون آمنا به كل من عند ربنا وما يذكر إلا أولو الألباب ربنا لا تزغ قلوبنا بعد إذ هديتنا وهب لنا من لدنك رحمة إنك أنت الوهاب ربنا إنك جامع الناس ليوم لا ريب فيه إن الله لا يخلف الميعاد. These ayat up to ayah number 9 are basically what are the attitudes of people who want the book as guidance. Anybody can study the book. You and I can study Quran, but that doesn't mean we'll get guidance. If you want, because Allah said previously the third subject was it's guidance for people. Well, not just anybody who picks up Quran and starts reading will get guidance. You have to have the right attitude. So He distinguishes the people who read the book and don't get guidance, and the people who read the book and do get guidance. What's the difference between them, and what attitude and motivation and thought process they have to bring, mentality they have to bring to be able to get guidance from it. And that attitude is described up until ayah number 9. It's actually explaining Hudal Linnas. What was the fourth subject in the beginning? Allah said, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا بِآيَاتِ اللَّهِ لَهُمْ عَذَابٌ شَدِيدٌ وَاللَّهُ عَزِيزٌ ذُو انْتِقَامٍ. Allah takes revenge against those who believe in the ayat of Allah. Look at the next subject. This is ayah number 10. إِنَّ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا لَن تُغْنِيَ عَنْهُمْ أَمْوَالُهُمْ وَلَا أَوْلَادُهُمْ مِنَ اللَّهِ شَيْئًا وَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمْ وَقُودُ النَّارِ كَدَأْبِ آلِ فِرْعَوْنَ وَالَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِهِمْ كَذَّبُوا بِآيَاتِنَا فَأَخَذَهُمُ اللَّهُ بِذُنُوبِهِمْ وَاللَّهُ شَدِيدُ الْعِقَابِ قُلْ لِلَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا سَتُغْلَبُونَ وَتُحْشَرُونَ إِلَى جَهَنَّمَ وَبِئْسَ الْمِهَادُ. That subject matter, disbelievers, Allah takes revenge from them, is repeated and then elaborated with the example of the Pharaoh, among other things. So it's so beautiful that Allah will mention 4 things for you concisely, then Himself explain them. This is why we study structural coherence. So we understand how Allah is first introducing a subject, then you have to go back to that original heading subject, and then with other ayat, Allah will Himself explain what He meant by that and what other dimensions of it will now start opening up. The study isn't about how cool it is that subject A, B, C, D happened. Then it again happened, A, B, C, D in that order. And it's so incredible that that happens for an oral tradition instead of a written one. This was recited before it was spoken. We can't remember what 4 items in what order and how am I supposed to repeat them in that order. We don't have that sophistication when we speak, but Allah does. But more than how cool it is, it's how important this is in you being able to identify what part of the text is elaborating what other part of the text. You see, it's like the first part is the seed, and the next part is the flower that blooms from that seed. You know. So that would be an example. The coolest I've studied so far, I don't know, they're all so cool. I can't even pinpoint. I can't do it. Will you discuss the macro order of the Quran, the surah, Fatiha first, Nas last, etc.? I plan to, but it'll take me a few years. I mean, if you want to read something about that in my book, it's there in Divine Speech, the one that I wrote with Sharif and Dawa. But I plan on doing something after I'm done with my analysis, a structural analysis of all the surahs. Then I will actually write something about how they all come together, because I feel like I can write about that now, but my view of that is not as sophisticated as I'd like it to be. And the only way that I think I'll have a decent view of it is if I've done my homework for all of the surahs structurally first. It's like saying I want to understand the bricks before I understand the entire wall, you know? So that's what I'm engaged in at this time. In Surah Al-Kahf, in the last story, the detailed description of how Dhul Qarnayn built the wall, and the words like "A'inuni bi quwwatin," isn't it complementing what we learned in the story of Musa alayhi salam, in the way that although we believe that Allah knows and does the best for everyone, and His intervention is in everything that takes place, whether it apparently brings relief or distress, we should still do our utmost in everything and not just sit and say Allah will do it better. At-tawakkul ala Allah duna tawakkul. I couldn't agree more. I think you're absolutely right. That's a very good observation too. It's what distinguishes those two stories from one another. You have a situation where matters are out of your hand, and the other where someone's taking matters in their hand, and that's really a balance between those two stories, and that neither of them are a denial of Allah's ultimate control. In view of the world's tragedies today, and in my reading of the Quran, it sometimes feels like humanity in general is described in very bad terms in the Quran, like being extremely arrogant, impulsive, susceptible to sin, and ungrateful to His Master. sometimes it creates the gloomy outlook on life. Is this really the notion of the Quran, or how should I look at this? Okay, so let me contextualize this for you. And I recommend, if you haven't, that you go through my lecture on Surah Al-Tin 95 for that particular question. I think Allah has done a pretty comprehensive job answering that gloomy world outlook question in that surah. But I should tell you that the Quran, you have to understand it as speaking to multiple audiences on multiple occasions. So part of our, understanding of the Quran is like if there was a surah that was talking to the worst of the worst, right, and it was addressing them. Knowing that and deciphering that from the language of the surah is important, because then you don't think that it's talking about you, or it's telling you that you're the worst of the worst, or humanity at large is the worst of the worst. Allah Azza wa Jal in many places in the Quran actually says very positive things. But yes, when you have indar, when you have the Prophet ﷺ being attacked or ridiculed, and then Allah compares the behavior of those who are doing this to him to those who did this to previous prophets and describes their gloomy outcome in the end, then you're talking about the failure of nations, and Allah Azza wa Jal does describe that in some elaborate detail because He doesn't want us to fail. But I for one, I don't have a gloomy outlook from the Quran. I feel like Allah Azza wa Jal paints a pretty balanced picture, and I'm hoping that Surah Al-Tin, the study of Surah Al-Tin, will help you see that, inshallah. And there's a lot of hope in the Quran, a hope in humanity also in the Quran. So, Allah honored human beings. Allah وَاسْتَعْمَرَكُمْ فِيهَا. He wanted you to build and develop on this earth, and progress on this earth and things like that. So that narrative is there too in Allah's book. Adding the word qul at the beginning of a sentence is a very strange way of talking. Could you please explain? Sure, I can. So let's give you an example. Allah is the ultimate teacher. Allah is teaching the Quran, allama al-Quran. He's teaching it through the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So even though you and I are reading the book was originally spoken. And so people never saw Allah, and people never saw a book in the Prophet's hands. They just heard his voice. So to them, it's just the voice of the Prophet representing the words of Allah. In some cases, Allah wanted the people to know that this particular statement that's about to be made, I want to make sure you hear it, you recognize that I'm commanding him to say this to you. Like me coming to you and saying, listen, I'm about to tell you something, but it's just want you to know, before I say this one thing, I just want you to know I'm relaying it on someone else. It's not me. I'm really mad at you. Like, I'm not mad at you, I'm relaying it on somebody's behalf. You understand? So when qul is mentioned, it's as though the Prophet ﷺ is about to say something drastic, maybe aggressive, maybe very powerful, maybe words of hope, whatever they may be. But the person listening needs to know, or it needs to be refreshed in their mind, these aren't the words of the person talking to me. He himself is being spoken to. The first word is what was spoken to him, qul, and then he says it to me. So the presence of the Prophet ﷺ is highlighted every time you hear qul. His presence, his role in that teaching. One of my favorite examples of that is Surah Az-Zumar. Or even actually my favorite example of that is Baqarah. No, let me do Zumar first. قُلْ يَا عِبَادِيَ الَّذِينَ أَسْرَفُوا عَلَىٰ أَنفُسِهِمْ لَا تَقْنَطُوا مِنْ رَحْمَةِ اللَّهِ. Very famous ayah. Say, my slaves who have done great sins against themselves, crossed the line against themselves, don't lose hope in Allah's mercy. Okay, so it begins with say. It is indicating, part of the beauty of that ayah, it's indicating that the Prophet ﷺ, not just Allah, but the Prophet ﷺ has to go to the sinful among his ummah or humanity, and he himself has to go say, don't lose hope in Allah's mercy. Allah didn't just say, my slaves, don't lose hope. No, you go and you put your hand over their shoulder and you go and tell them, don't lose hope. Allah says He'll forgive everything. Like, in this, not only is Allah giving mercy, Allah is teaching His Prophet that he has to be forgiving and merciful and teach the message of forgiveness and mercy. Right? So that qul becomes a two-part lesson, not only for the sinner, but also for the preacher, the teacher, the messenger in this case, who has to go deliver that, and that's captured in the qul. Sometimes the qul is removed on purpose. We were expecting a qul, and it's removed on purpose. So, for example, you find, وَإِذَا سَأَلَكَ عِبَادِي عَنِّي فَإِنِّي قَرِيبٌ. When my servant asks you about me, then I am near. Actually, the expected language is, when my servant asks you about me, tell him I am near. Because they asked you about me, so you tell him I'm near. But the part qul, tell him I'm near, is removed. Because Allah is so near that He tells the slave Himself. He even removes the Prophet ﷺ from that equation. He actually says it directly to himself, to the slave. So that's a little bit about the qul and its rhetorical benefits. Isn't Surah Hud 11:13 hinting at heavenly order when it says to produce 10 surahs where there are exactly 10 surahs that precede it? Cool. Well, those 10 surahs hadn't been revealed at the time Surah Hud was revealed, but from a book form, that's a pretty cool observation. I've never heard that before. And that is pretty epic. Love it. Love it. Thank you for sharing. In the passage of Surah Al-Nahl, you mentioned the blessing of different covers and complemented this passage with the verse in Surah Al-An'am. You left what we covered. Yes. Moreover, can the verse of Qaf be used to complement this passage of Surah Al-Nahl? We have removed you from your cover, so your day is sharp. Yeah. فَكَشَفْنَا عَنْكَ غِطَاءَكَ فَبَصَرُكَ الْيَوْمَ حَدِيدٌ. Yeah, I agree with you. That theme is complemented there. What you're referring to is probably another course a few years from now, which is compound imagery in the Quran. Meaning Allah, it's not just a phrase, it's actually imagery that's depicted in the Quran to teach a certain lesson. And in some other place, you're actually made to recall imagery that you've studied somewhere else. And then it's built upon, and then it's built upon somewhere else. So it's actually these, because the examples in the Quran are not just when Allah says Allah strikes an example. The examples in the Quran is when Allah is speaking in visual terms, right? When He's depicting artistic images or visual images in any way, even if He doesn't say that He's giving an example. Oftentimes that is in fact an example. And those are complementary to one another. Absolutely and certainly. And that's a really interesting study to embark in, inshallah ta'ala, one day. But not quite yet. In the passage of Surah Al-Nahl, 64 to 69, it mentions water, milk, wine, and honey. Interestingly, Surah Muhammad, yes, having the rivers of water, milk, wine, and honey, said in the same order as the passage of Surah Al-Nahl. Thoughts on this? I have lots of thoughts on this. First of all, Allah has made a parallel between heaven and earth in doing so, meaning Allah has made what we enjoy on the earth as a precursor to what will come in heaven. It's also interesting that one of them is Makki and the other is Madani, and they are years apart in revelation, yet there's still this intricate consistency in the ordering and the sequencing of the same items. There may be other observations that come when I get to my study of Surah Al-Nahl, but those are at least a couple that came to mind. وأوحى ربك إلى النحل أن اتخذي بيوتا من الشجر ومما يعرشون. Actually, I think you're just citing the ayat here. Okay. Yeah, I'm familiar with the ayat. Yeah. For Surah Al-Ma'idah, verse 11, you mentioned the use of anchors to help further understand this ayah in depth. Interestingly, this verse mentions Allah restraining peoples at the beginning of the passage, Surah Al-Ma'idah, towards the end of Surah Al-Ma'idah. Allah restrains the chains, restrains the children of Israel, chains of Israel from killing Jesus. Thoughts on this? Let me read what you wrote. Hold on. I think you mean for killing Jesus. Or from. I don't know. That requires a lot more thought on my part. I can't comment on that yet. Ma'idah is going to be 2 surahs away. Ali Imran first. Hopefully then Nisa and then Ma'idah. That's my next couple of years. I'm thinking probably Ma'idah and Nisa and Ma'idah together before end of next Ramadan. Probably. If I can finish. I mean, I'm ambitious about Ali Imran. I don't think it should be as challenging as Baqarah. because the ayat of ahkam are not there as many. But there's quite a bit of history. So, but if I can finish it by Ramadan, then my next undertaking probably will be Nisa and Ma'idah. So I can just finish the large five Makkiyat or Madaniyat and then keep mixing it up from there, inshallah. Uh, but I'm excited. I'm excited about the studies to come. In lesson 2, you talked about the difference between Quran and Kitab. But here are other words in the Quran which refer to the book. Of course, Furqan, Suhuf, Satir. What are you referring to? Was Zabur, Sijil, Tilawa. Yeah. Are there any difference with these words, or are they just synonyms? No, they're never. I mean, I've never used the word synonym for the Quran's words. I like to use the word near synonym or approximate synonym. Near synonyms, meaning every time a word is used, it has a particular connotation. And Furqan is coming up in our study of Al Imran. I actually did a pretty long discussion with Sheikh Suhaib today about the word Furqan in the ayah of Surah Al Imran in the beginning. You're citing Baqarah and other places where there are use of other terms are used. Yeah, but for the Quran, the most, what I was mentioning was the most common terms are Kitab and Furqan, or sorry, Kitab and Quran. Those are the two dominant names of the book. Others are, then I would say, highlighting different roles of the book, different roles they play for the benefit of humanity, or different ways to engage the book, like Tilawa. Quran, has it been called Suhuf in the Quran? I know previous scriptures have been. But Suhuf explicitly for the Quran, I don't know. I could be missing something, but I don't know. And these other words that you've described, other than Furqan, oh, you mean Asatir, okay. These are not used for the Quran directly. And Asatir is actually not even used for the Quran. It's actually used as a criticism or an allegation against the Quran. But they have been used for other books before. Quran, other descriptions, Maw'idah, Huda, other descriptions have been used for the Quran, but specifically referring to scripture or book. I would also make a distinction. Asatir means story, so let's put that aside. Furqan is a distinguisher, so it's an abstract term, so let's put that aside. Zabur, Sijil, and Suhuf can refer to written documents. Suhuf, scriptures, and Zabur is plates or thin sheets, and Sijil can also be a record. So those are the literal words for book or some kind of written document that are found in the Quran, other than Kitab, and so Kitab is the only other one. Then Quran has its own distinction, that which is recited, so you could say that it's like that. But yes, each of them does have a connotation, and certainly they're not synonymous. They're all highlighting something else. I give a khutbah about this, guys. I always wondered while reading these two ayat, why in the first one, which describes the people of hellfire, there was no wa before the word futihat, and in the second one describing the people, there is wa futihat. Well, I will tell you why, but for the benefit of everybody else, let me just walk them through the ayat. This is a rough translation, of course, folks. وَسِيقَ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا إِلَى جَهَنَّمَ وَسِيقَ الَّذِينَ where did it go? وَسِيقَ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا إِلَى جَهَنَّمَ زُمَرًا حَتَّى إِذَا جَاءُوهَا فُتِحَتْ أَبْوَابُهَا. Disbelievers, or those who disbelieve, will be herded towards hellfire or towards Jahannam in large droves until they approach it, until the time they approach it, its doors shall be opened. Its doors shall be opened. Now, when I approach you, say hello. If I just make an example sentence, when I approach you, say hello. That means you're not going to say hello until I approach you. You with me? When I say when this, then the when part has to happen, then the then part is going to happen. You with me? So when Allah says, when they approach the gates of hell, then they will be opened, means the gates of hell are currently closed. Okay? Now come to the other one. And those who were cautious of their master are brought towards heaven in large droves until they approach its doors and its gates were open. Careful now. They approached its doors and its gates were open. Wa futihat abwab. Did that little and make a difference? I came to your house, then the door opened. When I came to your house, the door was opened. That means the door was previously closed. When I say when I came to your house and the door was opened, when you just add that and, what does it imply? It actually implies even before I got there, the doors have already been kept open. Subhanallah. The doors of Jannah are currently open. The doors of Jahannam are currently closed. Nobody goes to Jahannam ahead of schedule. Plenty of people will go to Jannah ahead of schedule. Shuhada go to Jannah ahead of schedule. Quran describes it. And actually in the previous surah, مُفَتَّحَةً لَهُمُ الْأَبْوَابِ. The doors are being held wide open for them. It's explicitly divided. And so that wa changes everything. It just changes everything. It actually is a huge mercy of Allah that the wa is not there when describing hell, but the wa is there when describing the doors of heaven. Okay, I hope that helps. Please explain the difference. وَبَشِّرِ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ أَنَّ لَهُمْ جَنَّاتٍ تَجْرِي مِنْ تَحْتِهَا الْأَنْهَارُ كُلَّمَا رُزِقُوا مِنْهَا مِنْ ثَمَرَةٍ رِزْقًا قالوا هذا الذي رزقنا من قبل وأتوا به متشابها ولهم فيها أزواج مطهرة وهم فيها خالدون. And جزاؤهم عند ربهم جنات عدن تجري من تحت الأنهار خالدين فيها أبدا رضي الله عنهم ورضوا عنه ذلك لمن خشي ربه. In the first ayah there's a phrase تجري من تحتها الأنهار. Sure. In the second ayah there's an additional word عند جنات عدن تجري من تحتها الأنهار. Yeah, so one of them is describing additionally the garden, specific garden of Aden. I'd have to look at why the use of Aden. I mean that I wouldn't just compare these two places. There's lots of other places to compare them to. What will be an interesting study is where does Allah mention Aden and where does He not mention Aden, and then we'd probably get an intelligent answer to that question. But I don't think comparing two ayat would help solve the problem. Aden is, by the way, the biblical equivalent of what they call the Garden of Eden. Right? So, and it's a reference to the garden in which humanity used to be originally. And that's important also because Allah mentions the origins of humanity previously. Anyway, so we'll look at Aden a little bit later because I would have to do a lot more digging before I can answer that one. Can you recommend any book where we can find a thematic brief overview of the Quran? Something like a guidebook, just to figure out topics covered in the final revelation. I have seen examples of big complex books that had a guidebook from just to begin with. I mean, there are, but I don't really like them. Sorry I said that. Now I can't name them because you'd be like, Ustad Nouman doesn't like this book. Let me call the author and tell him. Hold on, let me pick one out. Hold on. Let me see if I have it. We had a beautiful scholar in Long Island in New York by the name of Sheikh Al-Fahim Job who did like a thematic overview of every surah and he had notes on it. We never published it. Can't find them anymore. That was a remarkable contribution. A nice place for you to start off with would be, Maududi's commentary. He's got an introduction to each surah, which is just 114 short reads. So it's less than 100 pages. I mean, it's voluminous, but the introductions are just one paragraph, two paragraphs. So that might be a nice place for you to look at. Instead of the whole book, but just an overview of each surah, especially the big ones. He covers them pretty nicely, I think. And of course, I'll be writing something about that when the time comes. When I'm done writing on the structure of the Quran, then I'll be writing some books on the Quran as a whole, sort of precursors to studying the Quran. My book has some parts of this, so the Divine Speech book you might find helpful in some regard. It goes more than the topics covered. It also talks about its style and some things you should be aware of before you engage the Quran. So मेरा सवाल ये है कि आपने गामदी साहब के काम का इल्मी तज्ज़िया किया है, क्योंकि मेरी नाक़िस राय में मौजूदा दौर में कोई दूसरा इनका पाए का काम नहीं कर सका। इनकी काम की बुनियाद हमीदुद्दीन फ़राही और अमीन असलम साहब के काम पर है। अगर आप गामदी साहब से इख्तिलाफ़ रखते हैं तो क्या आप इसकी वजाहत फरमाएंगे ताकि हम जैसे भी इनसे इज्तनाब करें? Okay, I'm going to answer that in English. First, I'll translate that question in Urdu. It's speaking about a scholar, an academic, by the name of Javed Ahmed Ghamdi, who's done quite a bit of work on the Quran. He's an intellectual. I've met him. I've been to his home. I've actually asked him elaborate questions about his views on the Quran. He has what you could consider somewhat unorthodox views on a number of things, and he's been the subject of a lot of controversy as a result in Pakistan and the Urdu-speaking world. His life has been threatened several times. He has his own commentary on the Quran, and he's got a view on the Sharia. He's written books on this stuff. I have looked at his work. I haven't looked at it in the kind of depth that he was hoping I would look at it in. I've had elaborate question answer sessions with him, along with the head of my research, Sheikh Suhaib Saeed. There are some things that he talks about that I find very compelling, very interesting. There are other things that I'm thoroughly unconvinced but I respect him a lot. And this is an opportunity for me to share my approach to differences of opinion. When I met him, I told him I'm a student and I'm a seeker, and I'm not coming to you to agree with you, nor am I coming to you to argue with you. But I will tell you that when you say something that doesn't make sense to me, I'm going to be I'm not going to take a disrespectful tone, but I'm going to be the most unapologetic questioner and critic that you'll ever find. I will question you, criticize you, and hammer you until I find your argument convincing. And at the end of it all, if I don't find it convincing, I'll just tell you I'm not convinced. Let's move on. And he totally respected that. And one of the most wonderful things about him that I really respected was that he wants criticism. He wants to be questioned. And I appreciated that personally in his approach. There is probably going to be some more discussion with him into the future about a number of issues, because I do think that there are some key aspects where I can't find myself agreeing with him, but I don't. Which brings me to the next point about my approach to these sorts of things. My disagreements with my teacher, one of my teachers, Dr. Asar Ahmed or Sheikh Akram Nadwi or Javed Ghamdi, or even though he's not, I don't consider him my teacher at all, but still, an academic I respect, or a classical mufassir or whatever. My job is not to come out to you and say, listen to this person, don't listen to that person, and they have this view that's incorrect and they have this view that's incorrect. I don't care. That's not my job, and I don't think that's the right approach. I don't believe that's the right approach at all. I'm a seeker, and I'm going to seek from wherever I can, and I'm going to agree and disagree with whoever I can, but I did that for myself. And then I'm going to try to share what I've learned and what I'm convinced of to the best of my ability. And in order for me to do that, I don't have to substantiate or negate somebody else. I don't have to do that. We are too obsessed with, so who do you agree with, and what's your disagreement with this one, and why do you agree with him, and why do you disagree with him? No, do your own homework. You have to be seekers yourself. And if you're not, if somebody's saying something that you think is crazy, or how could he come up with this conclusion, listen to the other point of view. And you know what? This is why we ask Allah, Asa an yahdiyani rabbi li aqraba min hadha rashada. Maybe Allah will guide me to something closer. I personally don't believe in, don't listen to this person, they're a deviant, they're a kafir, and you're going to go to hell if you listen to them. What is that? If that was the attitude, this is the exact attitude that fundamentalists of other religions have. Don't listen to the Muslims, they're crazy. We only came to Islam because we're open-minded, that we consider every point of view, we think about it. We're a nation of thought, critical thinking. I wouldn't abandon that for anything, Yes, somebody could say, but we don't know Arabic, or we don't know any better, and we trust what these people say. Well, maybe you shouldn't trust what anybody says just like that. You should have your own thoughts, and you should learn, not criticize everyone off the top of your head, but also not take lock, stock, and barrel. A sheikh said it, so it must be true. It doesn't work that way. I had to learn the hard way that it doesn't work that way. There were lots of subjects that I learned as a youth that I completely thought this is how Islam is. And later on in my studies, I discovered it's not that way. And I went back to those shuyukh and they said, well, yeah, I guess. But So I learned to respect scholarship, but also the part of our respect for scholarship is asking them critical questions and arriving at conclusions for ourselves. This is the only way knowledge moves forward and the ummah will move forward. We have to become more serious about our intellectual quests. Anyhow, I have just finished your videos about parenting, and the last one's really interesting. I'm trying to make an Iman program for my 14-year-old daughter with animations, videos, and PowerPoint presentations. Very cool. Because there is no Islamic school here or Sunday school at the masjid. So at the last video, you talked about an intellectual program for teenagers that you would probably make if you had time. Have you done it? If you have, can I find the video? I don't think they're on Bayyinah TV. I did something called Quran for Young Adults that addressed some of this stuff. Um, it's on Bayyinah TV. I think it's now called a comprehensive overview. So you could find it there. I did it for a bunch of teenagers in Dallas a couple of years ago, and it was recorded. I looked different back then, but it's there. I didn't finish it, but quite a bit of it is there. Ustad, if we teach from your lectures, is it enough to say anyone that my sources are videos rather than classical books? In your earlier days, you mentioned that you listened to video tafsirs a lot. Yeah, I did. And I said I learned this from Dr. Ahmed. And there's a difference between teaching tafsir and doing tadhkir. If you're just giving somebody advice from the Quran about Allah's mercy, forgiveness, justice, kindness, these are not, you don't have to cite somebody for that. But if you're doing tafsir study, then become a student of tafsir and cite the books, cite the sources. You know, there's a difference between those two things. If you're running a halaqah at your MSA, it's okay. You can copy anybody you want, and you don't have to give me credit either. You can just say, Alhamdulillah, no problem. In your other QA, you mentioned that there is no system to finding this continuity. However, now I see that you have introduced the notion of. Okay, what I meant by, okay, let me read your question first in its entirety. Now, however, now I see that you've introduced the notion of linear, anchor, and structural. So there does seem to be a system or emerging thereof to your way of finding continuity between the sections of a surah. The other question is, why where does symmetry belong in these? Is it evident in all the sections or just some sections? And maybe we can find some other patterns besides symmetry. What is the relationship between symmetry to linear to structural analysis? What is the difference between linear and structural? Great questions. Okay, I said you can't cage a surah to a certain structure. I have, so far, whatever surahs I have studied, I have not found symmetry in all of them. I have certainly found patterns in all of them. The example I gave you earlier on in this session of the beginning of Surah Ali Imran was not a symmetry. A, B, C, D, A, B, C, D is not symmetry. That's a parallel, right? If it was symmetrical, it would have been A, B, C, D, D, C, B, A. That's what it would have been. You have multiple kinds of structures, sometimes very complex ones. So it's a structural analysis, not really symmetrical necessarily. Symmetry is one kind of structure that I've seen, but there are other kinds of structures that are there as well, and sometimes very complex ones. The relationship between them is sometimes evident, sometimes not evident. Linear just means how things are progressing from one to the next, right? And that it's the progression of an argument. Structural seems to be how Allah wants us to review things and recap things and enhance our view of things, from one place to another. So it's actually Allah's grand scheme of, really instilling certain ideas in our mind in a deep and profound way. Anchors are probably the easiest part. They're not necessarily related to one another, but anchors are how Allah Azza wa Jal is teaching a lot of nuances, like a very, very subtle teachings are captured through anchors. And if you pay attention to them, you see how Allah Azza wa Jal is building a point using that kind of wordplay, using those kinds of anchors. But yeah, what I meant by you can't cage the Quran to a structure is, yeah, it won't be one kind of symmetry or one kind of linear coherence, or you're not necessarily going to find the same way of discovering anchors in every surah. But so far, whatever I've seen, I have found these three elements so far. Allah knows if the rest of the surahs have that or not. I can't say, I can't impose that on what's coming. And I don't come to the surah with the assumption that I'll find these things, but if they emerge, I document them. I'm doing research on the coherence of the Quran, very similar to yours, but instead of linear coherence in subject matter, my research is on the consistent uses of words in terms of its meaning. Have you come across or do you agree on such similarities in your research? For example, rafa has been used with the same primary meanings as elevated. I need to understand your question better. Are you saying that of all the root meanings that are possible of a word, Allah uses one dimension of them. I would urge that you study something like al-wujuh wa nadha'ir fil Quran, like the subject of multiple facets of a term. Um, because the words in the Quran can carry multiple connotations, and clearly kitab means book sometimes and means law other times, and it's very clear. For instance, just as an example off the top of my head, there can be multiple dimensions of meanings, and I would say that if you reduce the roots to a certain meaning in the Quran, and say, well, it only uses one dominant meaning, but is one of the things I disagree with Dr. Javed Hamdi, by the way, because he does believe, because of the context, a particular word can only mean one particular thing. My problem with that is there's an intended multiplicity in the Quran. There's an intended multi-dimensional language in the Quran, and you're kind of reducing it to one. And then how do you know that one is the one that Allah intends? It's a pretty big jump. You could say that this is more compelling meaning because of the context. I go that far. I'd agree. But can I say that's the only possible way to look at it? That I find a problem with. So that would be my response to that. Thank you very much for your questions. I've run out of your questions. So inshallah ta'ala in the next session we'll cover some more. Barakallahu li wa lakum. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.